Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mari Kleemola, and as mentioned by Oliver, I will start our presentation and I will describe the background of the harvesting pilot, and then it will be Claudia's turn to give you the details, and she is planning an online demonstration as well. Anna-Lena is also here and she will monitor the chat, and so we are hoping to get many questions and a good discussion. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we are using a blank PowerPoint template. This is because there was no one project that we could connect this work with. Instead, this is a loose collaboration between several projects, organizations, and people that just more or less happened to be in the same right place at the same right time. So here you can see the logos of the background organizations and projects that have contributed to this pilot. The one thing, or maybe there are others, but the one main thing that is common to all of them and that actually brought us together is that these projects, or maybe I should say we, are building the European Open Science Cloud, or EOSC, as you may know it. So that is behind all of this, but the collaboration itself was not planned in any of these projects beforehand. So next slide. Yes, thank you. In short, our presentation today, you will hear about the pilot on how DDI codebook records have been harvested from the CESTA data catalog into the B2Find catalog, and what role DDI played in this interoperability between the two catalogs. After a short background description, Claudia will dive into details of harvesting and mapping between DDI and EUDAT Core data models. And yes, as mentioned, we will be more than happy to discuss the lessons learned either during this session or afterwards. And next, please. Thank you. As this audience well knows, good quality metadata is a key element for any data infrastructure or ecosystem. The rise of the FAIR data principles, I'm sure everybody is familiar with them, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, has also risen the metadata awareness among the research community and among infrastructures and among funders also. So there are now currently several projects, several European projects and also worldwide projects working on metadata crosswalks, mappings, and various kinds of catalogs. But specifically behind this pilot, there were two simultaneous but independent developments. One of them was the FAIR project that was working on metadata integration pilots. And you can find a reference to their report in the last slide. And secondly, there was this CESTA work on developing this OAI PM8 endpoint for the CESTA data catalog. The endpoint is also known as metadata aggregator, and if you are interested, you should take a look at the and join the session on interoperability at noon, where my colleagues Toni Sissala and Matti Heinonen will be presenting the metadata aggregator. Next, please. So this is our test use case. We came up with the idea of the pilot because it's a win-win situation when we can test both the harvesting of the CESTA metadata using the aggregator and harvesting using the B2Find methodology. And of course, this has the benefit of being a real-world use case, as CESTA Eric wants to expose the catalog metadata as widely as possible. So when you look at this, you might think, and rightly so, that this is a no-brainer. I mean, this is an obvious case. But actually, coming up with this test case, this pilot required that the right people, or actually many right people, were in the same meetings and got to know each other and the work that each other are doing, and also that the timing was right. So that's a coincidence, but a very happy coincidence. So we are very lucky to be in this situation now. With that, I would give the floor to Claudia, and you can continue with all the details. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Maybe I should start with B2Find, how it works. Actually, before I say something about that, I would like to say what B2Find is. It's an interdisciplinary search portal, actually. It's maintained by the EUDAT project, which is again part of a lot of other projects. But however, the funding and project names, the system itself remains for some years now. How it works, in short, is that we have communities here. Then we do harvest them, harvest the records out of them, do some mapping, and upload everything into the web portal where you can search for it. Harvesting is done via several, let's say, channels. OAI PMH is probably the most best known because it's a protocol for metadata harvesting. CSW is mainly for catalog service over the web. That's mainly for georeference data. And we do support a lot of REST APIs, which is important insofar as for the mapping, we do support currently generic readers, as we call them, for generic metadata standards as Dublin Core and DataSite and OpenAir. But we also support, let's say, thematic ones, which is the ISO, and the FGDC is a kind of crosswalk for, again, georeference data. But we also do support any community-specific metadata. And this is tricky and requires a lot of work, but I think it's worth to even get those data. One more word about EUDAT Core. This is yet another metadata schema. You may ask why. The answer is because we need it. It was initially developed for transferring metadata between different EUDAT services. It's mainly DataSite, but I will come back to that. Finally, we are not only a metadata catalog or search portal, discovery portal. Here DDI, that was the main issue for us to start the demonstrator, to start the testing, that we wanted to have DDI as another generic reader for social science data. We are not only a catalog, we are also a metadata aggregator, as the records within B2Find are already harvested and from OpenAir and integrated in OpenAir Explore. So everything that is in B2Find is automatically in OpenAir as well. Now, what we did for Chester is we needed a way first to get the metadata out of the Chester data catalog. This was easy insofar as the test instance of the Chester data catalog already exposes metadata with OAI PMH. So we get them as XMLs and then do some mapping and upload it. Findings here. For the test instance, I understood that the Chester data catalog requires a login in order to avoid people to upload bullshit or to make clear it is a test instance and it is not the productive instance. That was a bit tricky for us because we had to implement another option into our code to enable the harvesting from password and login requirements, but that worked. There is no subset configuration for the OAI PMH. This is something OAI PMH offers to define several subsets. As there were none, we just took everything and getting 50,560 records back. So harvesting works. The mapping relates not to the question how to get the metadata out of the database, but rather how to get the metadata mapped onto the target scheme. In that case, this was DDI 2.5, and the target scheme here is now our EUDAT Core. And that is then uploaded on the test instance, on a B2Find test instance. And I will come to that, back to that later, hopefully show you findings here. What we did is that we implemented a new reader, as we said. And that's really cool because we wanted to do this for years, but we never had a real concrete use case where we can test everything. We did this. We did everything mapping to the EUDAT Core, as I said. the core elements which are different to data types in the EUDAT Core metadata schema are mainly identifier, because as you probably know, data site allows only DOIs because it was made for DOIs. EUDAT Core allows any identifier and prefers persistent identifier. That's also a discussion point. When is a identifier persistent? Sure, when it is a DOI, probably when it is any PID, but nonetheless, we take all. We do have an element discipline, which is important because we are an interdisciplinary discovery portal. We do have a new metadata element called instrument. This comes mainly from the natural sciences for measurement data from everywhere. And therefore an instrument, it's also important in high energy physics, for instance. And we do have a temporary coverage that relates to the time span the data is about. And the contact at the end comes because for some data, you need a contact because, for instance, for climate model data, the file is so big you can't open it on a desktop computer. And you probably need some help when you want to download it somewhere. Yeah, so that's the reason for that. So all in all, mapping worked fine. Now, to dive a bit into the concrete mapping, as I said, B2Find allows very specific mapping for each reader and additionally configuration for each community. Community in that case is Chester data catalog. Easy elements are those who are written down here, title, creator, contributor, and so on. It's easy insofar as it is just a simple mapping of metadata elements. So we tell our code, take the value which is into title and put it into our element title. We are very impressed that DDI allows a very good retrieval of information for temporary coverage, because this is not very typical. For the metadata access is a metadata element in B2Find, because we always refer to the originally harvested metadata that was is done automatically. So this is nothing we have to map. Only one more word for the geometry. It's in GeoCover, but it is within the Chester records. We didn't get information for GeoCover. All we got was a term for a country, and I will come to that back to that later in the demonstrator. Specified elements, or what we did in the mapping a bit specifically for Chester, is that publisher is a mandatory element in B2Find. So we've set a default. In case there is no publisher in distributor, then put Chester on it. For keywords, we included also the top classification. In description, as you see, we have the SAMPROC and the call mode from DDI, because we believe those information are important, and we've put it in the description because we didn't know where else to put. We tried it with our instrument, but it doesn't work properly, probably. Rights and related identifier are, as you see, also lists of things. For contact, we decided to get the URI from distribution, and for publication year, we took dates for distribution date. Tricky elements. Always the identifier, because internally B2Find has a ranking for when there is a DOI, then take the DOI. When there is a PID, take the PID. When there is any other URI, URL, take this. So we do expose then DOIs and PIDs whenever that's possible. As I just mentioned, instruments is a new metadata element, and we tried it for the collection mode. But it didn't work because sometimes the element was filled with a lot of text, and instrument is a facet in B2Find. So you would see on the left side where you can search for it or narrow down, that instrument containing really description of something is impossible. it seems there is no real, I don't know whether it is, but for collection mode, at least the information in is not really, doesn't look like a closed vocabulary. For language, we have the question how to retrieve the information, what the language of the data, not the metadata is. Because this language is an attribute within each record, right? Yeah, the discipline works in a way that we retrieve the information from the subject, so from the keywords, and then we have a script that maps it automatically to our internal discipline classification. And we've set a default again for social sciences. So if our script does not work properly, then the default is social sciences. For rights and for open access, we have a method that it is automatically true if there is no information like closed access or embargoed period or something like that within the rights information. What we learned, our initially question was if there is an added value when we use DDI 2.5 as a metadata standard, and the short answer is yes, there is, because harvesting metadata records from Chester with OAI data site returns only 2,700. When we take it with DDI, we get a lot more, like 50,000 something. And DDI 2.5 contains a lot more information than DataCite does, of course. Useful for us are, well, specifically the identifier and of course the temporary coverage, because it is not easy to expose those information with DataCite. What we also found is that DDI contains more information than B2Find can show, because we are a search portal, so we are not a metadata aggregator in the first case, right? We try to make research data findable across disciplines within an interdisciplinary international scope. So we want to show them, we want to make them searchable, but we are not, it's not our aim to aggregate them. At least it's not the first aim. We do expose it to open air, but this is not what we are made for. The question for instrument is interesting because we tested and tried and discussed. One outcome is that maybe that would be, instrument is definitely an important metadata element within the natural sciences, and it will, as far as I know, be within the next DataCite version included, but it's not really useful for the records that are offered by Chester. So our idea was maybe it would be a good idea to have such a specific element for data collection mode. But then, of course, the social sciences should agree on a closed vocabulary using that, right? And I don't know whether that exists. That would be a question from our side. Open issues, as I said, the special coverage, because we have only the nation, we have no bounding box, polygon, or point, so no geo coordinates. And always a question is whether it's a good idea to include further thesauri. Right, what we did is to integrate those harvested records, and I will show you that on a test machine. I have 1 more minute left, I think.
Yes, 1 minute left.
Then there is the link here, and what we plan to do now is to do the productive ingestion on productive B2Find as soon as the Chester data catalog, not the test instance, but the real data catalog is running. I'm not sure I can show you, but maybe we here are some sources. Maybe we can start at the same time while I show you when there are, whether there are important questions. Like this is how it looks. There you see that the discipline works fine. I think that's okay. What you cannot do for the geo stuff is when you here click in and you sample, I don't know, Northern Europe, it doesn't find any records because there are no geo coordinates. But if you search for like this Spain, it is findable because the spatial coverage here is given, but just as word, not as geo coordinates. And with that, I stop.